Careful, Nolan Hayes murmured, shifting the black umbrella farther over Evelyn Mercer's shoulder as camera flashes exploded through the rain. People would think we're together. Evelyn looked up at him. Water traced the loose strands of blonde hair along her cheek, and for one strange second the woman who could silence a 40-story boardroom with a look seemed to forget the reporters surrounding them. Would that be bad? The entrance of Riverside Community Center went still. 24 cameras were pointed at them. Sophie stood beneath Nolan's other arm, her paper fox pressed against her chest, staring up at Evelyn with the wide-eyed attention of a 9-year-old who understood far more than adults believed. Across the sidewalk, Graham Whitaker stopped smiling. 3 minutes earlier, Evelyn had been expected at the Mercer Development headquarters to cast the deciding vote on a multi-billion-dollar merger. Instead, she stood outside an aging community center in a borrowed raincoat while emergency crews checked a section of roof that had failed above the children's art room. Nolan had gotten 13 children out before water reached the damaged wiring. Sophie had escaped with nothing worse than a bruised wrist and a ruined backpack. Evelyn had arrived 20 minutes later because Nolan had called the emergency number printed on Riverside's ownership papers. He had expected a facilities manager. Somehow, the call had reached her. Now Graham pushed through the reporters, his dark coat protected by an assistant's umbrella. Evelyn, the board has delayed the vote twice. The investors are watching. Then they have something to watch. This is not a neighborhood meeting. We are talking about 12,000 jobs and the largest acquisition this company has ever attempted. Nolan heard the warning beneath the polished words. He gently moved Sophie behind him. Ms. Mercer should go. Evelyn turned toward him. You want me to leave? I want you to understand what standing next to us is going to cost. Graham gave a humorless smile. At least one person here understands reality. Sophie looked at the cameras, then at Evelyn. Dad says doing the right thing usually costs something. Nolan closed his eyes for half a second. Sophie. What? You say it all the time. Evelyn's gaze stayed on Nolan. Then maybe it is time I found out how much. Another wave of flashes lit the street. Graham stepped closer. Think carefully. One photograph can change the merger, your board, and his life. Nolan heard every word. Men like Graham had always mistaken work boots for ignorance. He shifted the umbrella so Evelyn and Sophie remained dry while rain soaked his own shoulder. That photograph would be published before midnight. By sunrise, Nolan Hayes would be accused of using a powerful woman to save his job. By noon, Sophie would hear strangers debate whether her father had planned every kind thing he had ever done. And before the week ended, Evelyn would discover something worse than fraud inside her company. She would discover her own signature at the center of it. 3 weeks earlier, Nolan woke at 5:43 in the morning to the uneven rattle of the furnace in his small Chicago bungalow. He listened for 3 seconds, decided the blower motor could survive another month, and went to the kitchen. Sophie was already sitting at the table in dinosaur pajamas, working on a spelling worksheet beside a photograph of her mother. Nolan packed her lunch with the concentration of a man handling something important. Turkey sandwich. Apple slices. Carrot sticks she would probably ignore. 1 oatmeal cookie. You forgot the note, Sophie said without looking up. I was testing whether you noticed. You test me every Tuesday. And you fail every Tuesday. He folded a small piece of paper and slipped it into her lunchbox. 3 years had passed since Melissa died, but Nolan had never removed her photograph from the kitchen. He had never tried to make grief disappear. He had simply learned how to cook around it, work around it, and raise a daughter inside the space it left behind. An overdue electric bill sat beneath a grocery coupon. His pickup needed tires before winter. Riverside had frozen overtime 2 months earlier. Nolan knew all of that. He also knew Sophie had a vocabulary test, and in that kitchen, her test mattered first. By 7:30, his faded blue pickup rolled through Riverside's iron gate. The community center had served the West Side for almost 40 years. Its windows leaked cold air. Its boiler had been repaired so many times Nolan joked that half the original machine existed only in photographs. But inside, children ate breakfast before school, parents used donated computers to apply for jobs, retired workers attended physical therapy classes, and families who had nowhere else to go could sit somewhere warm without being asked what they could afford. That morning, the heating system failed in the East classroom. A visiting operations manager glanced at his tablet and said, "Close the room." Nolan looked at the 16 children arriving for tutoring. "And put them where?" "That is not my problem." "It becomes your problem when children are sitting in 48 degrees. The manager glanced at Nolan's work shirt. "This building is under financial review, Mr. Hayes. Stop spending money we have not approved." Nolan knelt beside the furnace panel. "I am not spending anything." "Then what are you doing?" "Making sure the kids do not need coats indoors." He found a failing contactor, cleaned the terminals, reset the control, and heard the system return to life. Warm air moved through the vent. A small cheer came from the hallway. Nolan stood and found Evelyn Mercer watching him. She wore a charcoal coat and carried a leather portfolio. Behind her stood Graham Whitaker, president of corporate strategy and the man responsible for the redevelopment plan. Nolan recognized Graham. He did not recognize Evelyn immediately. "Who approved that repair?" she asked. Nolan wiped his hands. "Nobody." The operations manager quickly added, "Mr. Hayes has difficulty following authorization procedures." Nolan looked at Evelyn's polished shoes, then the portfolio in her hand. The furnace had difficulty following them too. Sophie covered a laugh. Graham did not. Evelyn's mouth almost became a smile. "Almost. I am Evelyn Mercer." Nolan's expression changed slightly. The Mercer name was on the deed, the payroll, and the letter that could close Riverside. "Then you are the person I have been emailing." "For 6 months. You emailed me. Facilities safety reports. Roof drainage, emergency generator, boiler pressure, electrical panels." Evelyn looked at Graham. "I have never seen them." Graham answered smoothly. "Routine maintenance is handled below the executive level." Nolan picked up his toolbox. "That is probably why nothing gets fixed above the basement." At noon, Riverside's main hall filled with parents, volunteers, teachers, and children. Evelyn stood near the stage while Graham presented the numbers. Riverside required millions in renovations. The property sat on land that had become increasingly valuable. Mercer Development planned to sell the site as part of an asset restructuring necessary for its upcoming merger. Graham spoke calmly about efficiency, liability, and responsible capital allocation. Every sentence sounded reasonable until someone asked what would happen to the people in the room. "Alternative services exist throughout the city," Graham said. Grace Holloway, Riverside's director, raised her hand. "The closest after-school program with open capacity is 4 miles away. Transportation solutions can be explored. Most of these families do not own cars." Graham's smile tightened. "We cannot operate a property indefinitely because change is inconvenient." Nolan stayed near the side doors. He had spent enough years in rooms with executives to know anger was rarely useful when the other person controlled the microphone. Then Sophie raised her hand. He shook his head. She kept it up. Evelyn noticed. "Go ahead." Sophie stood. "When you were little, did anyone ever save a place you loved?" The hall became silent. Graham glanced at his watch. Nolan stepped forward. "Sophie, sit down." Evelyn stopped him. "No. I want to hear her." Sophie held her notebook against her chest. "My dad says buildings are not important because of bricks. They are important because of what people become inside them. I learned to read here. Marcus learned not to be scared of math here. Mrs. Bell got groceries here when her husband was sick. My dad got his first maintenance job here after my mom died. She swallowed. So I just wondered whether somebody ever saved something for you. Evelyn's hand tightened around her portfolio. She looked toward the faded blue stripe running along the wall beneath the windows. Her father, Daniel Mercer, had painted that stripe himself 30 years earlier when the company funded Riverside's first expansion. She had been 8, sitting on the floor with paint on her shoes while he told her that a company did not deserve respect because its buildings were tall. It deserved respect when the people living in their shadows were stronger because it existed. She had not thought about that afternoon in years. Graham leaned closer. This is irrelevant. Evelyn closed her portfolio. No. It is inconvenient. She turned toward the room. The closure vote is postponed for 10 days. Graham stared at her. The merger agreement requires the asset schedule by Friday. Then Friday will have a better schedule. Evelyn. 10 days. Applause began in the back of the hall. Evelyn did not smile. She knew enough about business to understand she had not saved Riverside. She had merely moved the execution date. What she did not yet understand was why Graham looked less irritated by the delay than frightened by it. The next morning, Nolan gave Evelyn a hard hat, a clipboard, and work gloves that still had a store tag attached. You bought these for me. Grace did. You did not think I would come back. I thought people with private elevators usually have other priorities. Evelyn looked toward the basement stairs. Today I have pipes. Nolan showed her everything. The patched boiler. The electrical panel scheduled for replacement 2 years earlier. The roof drain that backed up during hard rain. The emergency generator that started only after 2 manual attempts. He did not dramatize anything. That impressed Evelyn more than anger would have. How much to replace this valve, she asked. About $500 with labor. She checked the report. Corporate paid $4,700 last year. Nolan looked at her. Not here. At the next system, the numbers were worse. Riverside had been billed for 12 commercial heaters Nolan had never seen. A roof pump listed as installed 14 months earlier did not exist. Most disturbing was an invoice for a new emergency generator valued at $180,000. Nolan led her to the generator room and tapped the faded metal plate. This machine is 19 years old. Evelyn photographed the serial number. Could the invoice refer to another unit? Not unless somebody installed it and took it home. She looked at him. Nolan did not smile. I am serious. Instead of accusing Graham immediately, Evelyn ordered the procurement files. Graham sent them within an hour. Everything appeared complete. Purchase orders. Delivery confirmations. Inspection certifications. Digital approvals. Evelyn stared at the signatures. One of them was hers. 6 months earlier, she had approved an expedited capital package containing more than 40 properties. Riverside was one line in a 100-page document. She remembered the meeting. The merger negotiations had been collapsing. Graham had told her the package contained routine maintenance reallocations. She had signed it in under 3 minutes. Nolan noticed her face change. What is it? Evelyn turned the tablet toward him. I approved this. You approved buying equipment. I also approved an accelerated disposition clause if the repairs failed to improve the building's operating score. Nolan read the document carefully. So if Riverside stayed broken, selling it became easier. Yes. And you signed it. Yes. She did not blame Graham. She did not explain the merger. That mattered to Nolan. Evelyn lowered the tablet. I need to know whether I was deceived or whether I was simply too busy to notice what I was doing. Nolan closed the generator panel. Those are different problems. Which one is worse? Ask the families who lose the building. Over the next 5 days, Evelyn returned every morning. She helped Grace compare invoices. She sat through tutoring sessions. She watched Nolan repair a wheelchair ramp after corporate rejected the materials request. On the third afternoon, she found him replacing a broken cabinet hinge while Sophie worked on fractions with Marcus. "You could make more money somewhere else," Evelyn said. "I did." Nolan kept turning the screwdriver. "Before Melissa died, I supervised maintenance for 3 office towers downtown. Why leave?" He glanced toward Sophie. "My schedule was 6 days a week. After her mother died, Sophie stopped sleeping. Riverside had a grief counselor who worked with kids in the afternoons. Grace offered me a maintenance job so I could be here when school ended. You traded a career for a schedule. I traded money for time with my daughter. Do you regret it?" Nolan looked at Sophie laughing across the room. "Ask me when she stops wanting me around." On the 5th evening, Evelyn sat at Nolan's kitchen table eating pepperoni pizza from a paper plate while Sophie built a volcano for school. Baking soda covered half the counter. Red food coloring had somehow reached the refrigerator handle. "This is less controlled than a merger," Evelyn said. Nolan handed her a towel. "And cheaper." Sophie looked up. "Miss Mercer, do you have kids?" "No, do you want them?" Nolan nearly dropped a glass. "Sophie." Evelyn surprised him by answering. "I never thought I had time." Sophie considered that. "Dad says time does not appear. You give it to things." Nolan stared at his daughter. "I am going to start charging you royalties." Evelyn laughed. The sound felt unfamiliar in the small kitchen, then strangely natural. Her eyes moved to Melissa's photograph beside the window. She was beautiful. Nolan followed her gaze. She was stubborn. "Sophie gets that from her?" "Absolutely. Not from you." He finally smiled. "I am extremely easy to work with." Evelyn laughed again. For a few minutes, Riverside, the merger, and Graham disappeared. Then her phone rang. Corporate audit had found something. The permit number listed for Riverside's replacement generator belonged to an industrial warehouse 23 miles away. Evelyn's smile vanished. Nolan watched her listen. When she ended the call, he asked, "How bad?" "Bad enough that someone expected nobody to check." The following morning, Graham moved the merger vote forward. Evelyn confronted him in the executive conference room with the false permit number. Graham did not panic. That frightened her more. "You are looking at an administrative mistake," he said. 12 missing heaters are administrative mistakes. The equipment may have been reassigned. Without inventory records. This company owns thousands of assets. Evelyn placed Nolan's photographs on the table. A 19-year-old generator was billed as new. Graham's expression hardened. "Do you understand what happens if you delay this merger again? The bridge financing expires Monday. The company loses favorable terms. Projects freeze. Thousands of employees become vulnerable because you developed an emotional attachment to one failing building. This is not about emotion. Then behave like a chief executive officer." Around the table, several directors avoided Evelyn's eyes. Graham continued. "You approved the capital package. Your signature is on the disposition clause. If fraud occurred, you signed the document that made it possible." The words landed precisely where he intended. Evelyn knew he was manipulating her, but she also knew he was not entirely wrong. Before she could respond, her phone vibrated. "Grace Holloway." Evelyn answered. Grace was shouting over background noise. A roof drain had failed during a storm. Water had entered the art room. A ceiling panel had fallen. Sophie was hurt. Evelyn was out of the room before Graham finished saying her name. At Riverside, Nolan was kneeling beside Sophie while a paramedic examined her wrist. 13 children sat safely in the gym wrapped in blankets. Nolan's jeans were soaked to the knees. "She is all right," he told Evelyn before she could ask. "Bruised wrist. No break." Sophie looked up. "You came." Evelyn crouched beside her. "Of course I came." Nolan heard the words. So did a reporter standing near the lobby doors. Someone had alerted the press before Evelyn arrived. Within minutes, cameras crowded the sidewalk. When the paramedics cleared Sophie to leave, Nolan opened his umbrella and guided her outside. Evelyn stepped beside them. Rain came sideways beneath the wind. Nolan shifted the umbrella over both of them, taking the rain himself. "Careful," he murmured as cameras flashed. "People would think we're together." Evelyn looked up. "Would that be bad?" Graham arrived just in time to hear the answer. By midnight, the photograph was everywhere. By morning, the story was no longer about Riverside. One business site called Nolan, the maintenance man influencing a billionaire chief executive officer. Another suggested Evelyn had abandoned merger negotiations because of an undisclosed personal relationship with an employee. A television commentator displayed Nolan's salary beside Evelyn's estimated wealth. Sophie saw one headline before Nolan took her tablet away. "Are they saying you like Miss Mercer because she is rich? They are saying whatever keeps people watching. Do you like her?" Nolan looked at his daughter. "That is not the part they are allowed to decide." Across town, Graham entered Evelyn's office carrying a stack of articles. "This is leverage," he said. "For whom?" "For every director already worried you have lost objectivity. The fraud matters more than a photograph. Not if the person accusing us is the man standing under your umbrella." Evelyn understood. If Nolan became unreliable, Riverside's evidence became easier to dismiss. That afternoon, Graham went to the maintenance office alone. He placed an envelope on Nolan's desk. Inside was a check for $200,000, a paid lease on a house in a better school district, and an employment offer from a facilities company in Wisconsin. Nolan read the first page and put it down. "You did research. I solve problems. You create expensive ones first." Graham ignored the insult. "Take Sophie somewhere quiet. Cameras disappear. Her classmates stop asking questions. You get a better job. Riverside closes, but the programs are transferred." "Transferred where?" "That is not your responsibility. That is the sentence people use when they want to sleep after doing something they know is wrong." Graham's smile disappeared. "Do not confuse poverty with virtue." Nolan slid the folder back. "Do not confuse money with authority over me." Graham leaned closer. "Your daughter has already lost one parent. How much attention do you think she can survive before you decide pride is costing too much?" Nolan stood. The room seemed smaller. "Leave my daughter out of this. I am trying to protect her." "No. You are trying to make me afraid using the one person I would burn my whole life down to protect." Graham met his eyes. "Exactly." Then he walked out. The next blow came from Evelyn. Not because she intended it, but because fear made her careful at the wrong moment. The board called an emergency press conference. Reporters asked whether Nolan had influenced Riverside decisions. Evelyn said no. They asked whether they had a romantic relationship. "My personal life has no bearing on the safety investigation." Then a reporter produced a copy of the $200,000 offer and asked whether Nolan had requested payment to remain silent. Evelyn knew immediately Graham had leaked only the first page. She had no proof yet that Nolan rejected it. Her counsel whispered, "Do not speculate." A director whispered, "Protect the merger." Cameras waited. Nolan stood in the back of the room, having arrived because Evelyn asked him to provide maintenance records. Their eyes met. Did Mr. Hayes seek financial benefit? The reporter repeated. Evelyn hesitated. 2 seconds. Maybe 3. We are reviewing all relevant communications. It was a legally careful answer. It destroyed something anyway. Nolan looked at her without anger. That made it worse. He left before the press conference ended. That evening, Evelyn went to his house. Sophie was upstairs. Nolan stood beneath the porch light. I did not accuse you, she said. No, I had not seen the entire offer. I know. Then why are you looking at me like that? Because Graham made you choose between what you knew about me and what you could prove about me. Evelyn swallowed. I chose caution. You chose the room. What? The board. The cameras. The merger. For 3 seconds, you chose the room you knew over the man you said you trusted. That is not fair. No. It is not. His voice remained quiet. That is why it hurts. Evelyn stepped closer. Give me time. Nolan looked through the doorway toward Sophie's backpack. You can survive a corporate scandal. My daughter has to survive being 9. He handed Evelyn his Riverside identification card. I resigned. This afternoon. Nolan, do not do this. I am not punishing you. Then stay. I am protecting her. And us? His face changed. There cannot be an us if every time your world gets scared, Sophie and I become evidence. He closed the door gently. For 2 days Nolan stayed away from Riverside. On the 3rd morning, Grace arrived at his house carrying a banker's box filled with old maintenance records. You quit your job, she said. You did not quit knowing where everything is. They spread documents across the kitchen table after Sophie left for school. Nolan no longer cared about proving Graham corrupt for Evelyn. He cared about understanding how a building full of children had been allowed to fail while corporate records called it repaired. The answer came from serial numbers. Every major piece of commercial equipment carried one. Nolan compared the old generator's plate to the invoice. The invoice claimed a new unit had been installed 14 months earlier. He called the city permit office and requested the public inspection record. No inspection existed at Riverside. The permit number belonged to another address. Grace found delivery photographs submitted to corporate accounting. Nolan zoomed in on the background of one image. A warehouse sign was visible behind the truck. He recognized the contractor name. The same contractor had supposedly supplied Riverside's heaters. A retired city inspector Nolan knew from years of permit work confirmed that the company had failed inspection twice at unrelated properties. Then he found the part that changed everything. 3 months before Evelyn signed the capital package, Nolan had filed a written generator failure report. Corporate facilities acknowledged receiving it. 2 weeks later, the report's status changed to resolved. Nolan had never received the replacement. Someone had closed his complaint inside the system before sending Evelyn the package that described Riverside's repairs as complete. Grace stared at the timestamp. Can you prove who changed it? Not from here. Then what good is it? Nolan looked at the acknowledgement code. It tells us where to ask. Evelyn could access the corporate audit log. Nolan hesitated before calling. She answered on the first ring. Nolan. I am not calling about us. Silence. All right. He gave her the acknowledgement number. Find out who closed this report. 20 minutes later, Evelyn called back. Her voice was different. Graham's administrative account. Nolan closed his eyes. That is enough to reopen the investigation. No, she said. There is more. My office received your original report. Nolan looked at Grace. You said you never saw it. I did not. Graham's staff marked it routine and archived it before my morning briefing. Then he deceived you. Evelyn was silent. Not completely. What does that mean? I found an email from Graham warning me that Riverside's safety score was deteriorating. I answered that he should proceed with whatever disposition protected the merger schedule. Nolan said nothing. Evelyn continued. He hid the details. But I gave him permission not to bring me problems. I did not know what he was doing, Nolan. But I created the kind of office where not knowing was convenient. For the first time since the press conference, he heard something in her voice stronger than regret. Accountability. What are you going to do? He asked. Tell the board everything. That could cost you the merger. Yes. Your job. Yes. Your father's company. Evelyn looked through the glass wall of her office at Graham entering the boardroom. Then I finally know how much doing the right thing costs. That evening, Riverside held what might have been its final fundraiser. Families filled the gym with paper stars, donated food, folding chairs, and the determined energy of people who had spent their lives surviving decisions made in rooms they were never invited into. Nolan had no intention of attending. Then Sophie called him from Grace's phone. Dad, the lights keep blinking. He was already reaching for his coat. Where is Grace? With the little kids. Stay with her. Do not go downstairs. I know. Sophie. I know, Dad. Nolan arrived 7 minutes later as the building went dark. The emergency generator failed to start. Phone lights appeared across the gym. Children began calling for parents. Nolan's voice cut through the darkness. Everyone stay where you are. Emergency lights will come on. Grace, move the younger kids toward the center aisle. The battery lamps flickered on. Evelyn found Nolan near the electrical room. Tell me what you need. Keep Graham away from the maintenance office. Why? Because he is here. Graham stood at the far end of the corridor beside 2 corporate security employees, holding a document box. Evelyn walked toward him. Where are you taking those? Company records. They stay. You do not control evidence after authorizing an outside audit. I am the chief executive officer. Graham gave a cold smile. For the moment. In the generator room, Nolan removed the access panel. The automatic transfer switch had been placed in service mode. It was not equipment failure. Someone had intentionally prevented automatic startup. He reset it and tried the generator. The engine coughed but did not hold. Nolan switched to the secondary fuel line, manually primed the system, and tried again. The engine caught. Lights returned one section at a time. Applause moved through the building, but Nolan did not celebrate. He was staring at the service log attached inside the generator cabinet. Someone had inspected the machine that afternoon using a temporary contractor badge. Nolan took a photograph. Graham's security team had entered Riverside 4 hours earlier. Evelyn saw the image. He knew the generator was failing. Worse, Nolan said. Somebody made sure it would fail tonight. They found Graham in the maintenance office. He did not deny being there. I ordered an inspection, he said. Then why was the transfer switch disabled? Ask the contractor. Evelyn placed her phone on the desk. The contractor is already speaking to outside counsel. Graham's face changed slightly. You are bluffing. Am I? Nolan stood beside the door. Graham looked at him. You think she will save you? Ask her who authorized Riverside for disposal. Nolan did not move. I already know. Graham turned to Evelyn. Then perhaps he also knows that without my merger, this company loses financing. Projects stop. People lose jobs. I moved money because Riverside was dying. I accelerated what everyone knew had to happen. One obsolete building versus 12,000 employees. That is not greed. That is arithmetic. Evelyn stared at him. You falsified safety repairs. To protect the deal. Children were inside. And no one died. Nolan's expression hardened. That is not a defense. That is luck. Graham looked at him with contempt. Men like you worship small things because you have never been responsible for large ones. Nolan stepped closer. No. Men like me understand large decisions because we live where they land. Graham's phone rang. He ignored it. Evelyn picked up the document box. 9 tomorrow morning. Full board. Independent counsel. Every record. You expose me, you expose yourself. Evelyn met his eyes. I know. At 9 the next morning, the Mercer Development boardroom was full. Directors. Attorneys. Auditors. Graham sat on one side of the table. Evelyn stood at the head. Nolan sat in the back beside Grace. Sophie was at school. He had refused to bring her into another room filled with people who might turn her father into an argument. Graham spoke first. He displayed Evelyn's signature on the capital package. He showed her email authorizing whatever disposition protected the merger schedule. The chief executive officer approved Riverside sale, he said. She approved the financial strategy. Now, after developing a personal relationship with an employee, she wants to pretend she was deceived. Several directors looked at Evelyn. She did not interrupt. Graham continued. I made aggressive decisions because she demanded results. If I am guilty of anything, it is executing her strategy too effectively. Silence followed. It was a better defense than blaming Nolan. It contained enough truth to be dangerous. Evelyn stood. He is right about one thing. Nolan looked up. My signature is real. My email is real. I approved a process I did not examine closely enough because I was afraid of losing this merger. Graham hid safety reports, falsified repairs, routed money through contractors connected to his private investment partnership, and interfered with Riverside's emergency system. But I will not stand here and tell you I bear no responsibility. I made it easy for him to hide the truth because I rewarded people for bringing me clean numbers instead of difficult facts. One director leaned forward. Evelyn, counsel advises against making admissions before the investigation is complete. That advice is exactly how companies become very good at avoiding sentences that begin with, I was wrong. She connected her tablet to the screen. Nolan's original safety reports appeared beside timestamps showing Graham's administrative account closing them. City permit records showed that equipment billed to Riverside had never been inspected there. Bank records traced inflated payments through a contractor in which Graham held an undisclosed financial interest. Finally, footage from Riverside showed a contractor entering the generator room hours before the fundraiser and placing the transfer switch into service mode. Graham stood. You are destroying the company over one building. Evelyn looked at him. No. You convinced yourself the company could survive anything as long as the quarterly numbers looked healthy. The merger collapses if this goes public. Then it collapses. The room went still. I have informed the merger partner, regulators, and outside counsel. I have also offered my resignation to this board effective after an independent transition review. Graham stared at her. For the first time, he had no leverage left. She had admitted the truth before he could weaponize it. Security entered quietly. His authority was suspended pending investigation. No dramatic speech followed. No one applauded. Real consequences rarely needed applause. After the meeting, Nolan found Evelyn alone on Riverside's playground. Morning sunlight reflected from puddles beneath the swings. She had removed her coat and folded it beside her. For the first time since he had known her, she looked like someone who did not know what came next. Did they accept your resignation? He asked. Not yet. The board appointed an independent committee. I may still lose the job. And the merger? Suspended. Riverside. Transferred into an independent community trust. Mercer Development. Will fund the repairs, but the company will not own it. Nolan nodded. That is good. Evelyn looked at him. Is that all you came to say? No, he sat on the swing beside her. You told the truth when it cost you something. I should have done it sooner. Yes. She looked down. He continued. You should have defended me at the press conference. I know. You should have read what you signed. I know. You should have listened before Sophie had to ask you a question in front of 100 people. Evelyn almost smiled. Are you going to leave anything for my therapist? Nolan finally smiled. Then it disappeared. I believe you are sorry. Hope rose in her face. But trust does not come back because the villain was caught. Evelyn nodded slowly. What happens now? You keep doing the right thing when nobody is photographing it. And us? Nolan looked toward the riverside windows. We find out whether there is an us when neither of us needs the other to rescue anything. Evelyn accepted that. For once, she did not negotiate. 6 months later, Riverside reopened on a clear October afternoon. The roof no longer leaked. A new generator sat behind a locked safety enclosure with inspection records available to the community board. The East classroom stayed warm without Nolan carrying spare parts in his truck. Grace remained director. Nolan returned as operations director only after a community hiring committee interviewed him alongside 4 other candidates. He had insisted on that. Sophie told everyone he practiced for the interview more nervously than she practiced spelling. Evelyn remained chief executive officer after the independent review concluded that she had failed in oversight but had not participated in Graham's fraud. The board imposed new controls. Safety complaints bypassed operating executives and went directly to an independent committee. Vendor ownership had to be disclosed. No executive could close a community facility without a public impact review. Evelyn had lost the merger. The company's stock had fallen. 2 expansion projects were delayed. Yet 12,000 people had not lost their jobs, as Graham had predicted. The company survived. The truth. That lesson changed Evelyn more than any victory could have. She did not visit Nolan with cameras. She did not buy Sophie expensive gifts. She came for Tuesday dinners. She helped with homework on Thursdays. She learned to make grilled cheese without burning one side. She listened when Riverside residents disagreed with her. She spent 4 months earning back the right to sit comfortably at Nolan's kitchen table. At the fall festival, paper lanterns moved above the Riverside courtyard while children painted pumpkins and a local bluegrass trio played near the garden. Sophie stood beside an art display wearing a glitter-covered paper crown. At the center was a painting of 3 figures beneath a black umbrella. One was tall and wore work boots. One had blonde hair. The smaller one stood between them holding a paper fox. Above the picture Sophie had written, "The day nobody left." Evelyn read it twice. Your daughter is subtle. Nolan shook his head. I have never accused her of that. Sophie appeared beside them. People keep asking whether you two are finally together. People should develop hobbies, Nolan said. That is not an answer. Evelyn laughed. Several parents nearby were watching them with knowing expressions. Nolan leaned toward Evelyn. Careful. People would think we're together. She looked at him, remembering the rain, the cameras, the boardroom, and the months when he made her prove that staying was not the same thing as arriving. Would that be bad? This time Nolan did not look toward reporters. There were none. He did not look toward investors. There were none of those either. He looked at Sophie, who was trying very hard not to smile, then back at Evelyn. No, he said. Not anymore. He reached for her hand. Evelyn held on. Sophie slipped between them and took their other hands as if completing a shape she had been waiting months to finish. Riverside glowed behind them, not as a building a powerful woman had saved, and not as a monument to a quiet man who refused to be bought, but as proof that sometimes the hardest thing to repair was not a roof, a generator, or a company. It was trust. And unlike everything else Nolan Hayes had ever fixed, trust had no replacement part, no shortcut, and no guarantee. It only had choices, made again and again, until one day three people looked at each other and realized none of them was waiting for the other two to leave.